You think you're lazy? You're not. You just stopped trusting yourself a long time ago, and nobody ever told you that those are two completely different problems. Last night you made a plan. This morning, you broke it before your eyes were even fully open. You reached for your phone instead of your shoes, scrolled through someone else's life instead of building your own, told yourself 5 more minutes instead of becoming the version of you that you promised to be. And in that small, quiet, forgettable moment, something happened that had nothing to do with energy. Nothing to do with willpower. Nothing to do with how tired you were. What if the problem was never motivation at all? Think about how this week actually went. The workout you skipped because you'd start fresh Monday. The app you deleted in a moment of clarity, then quietly reinstalled 3 days later when boredom hit. The book sitting on your nightstand while your thumb moved through 15-second videos instead. The message you meant to send. The project you meant to open. The version of today you described to yourself last night, replaced by the version you actually lived. None of those moments felt dramatic. That's exactly the trap. Self-respect doesn't collapse in one big failure. It erodes in 1,000 invisible ones, each one small enough to forgive, each one quietly recorded somewhere you don't consciously check. Here's what's actually happening underneath all of it. Every time you tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, and tomorrow arrives looking exactly like today, you're not just missing a task. You're casting a vote about who you are. Psychologist Bandura called this self-efficacy, your internal belief about whether you're actually capable of doing what you say you'll do. It isn't built from inspiration. It isn't built from a good podcast or a motivational video at midnight. It's built from evidence, accumulated promise by promise. And right now, the evidence you're collecting against yourself is stacking up faster than you realize. Why does this hurt more than an ordinary failure? Because ordinary failure says you tried and missed. This says something colder. It says you didn't even believe yourself enough to try in the first place. And your brain knows the difference. Even when you don't say it out loud. That's why another self-improvement video feels good for 10 minutes and hollow by morning. You're consuming belief instead of producing it. And consumption was never going to rebuild what only action can repair. There's a darker mechanic running underneath this, too, one almost nobody names correctly. Psychologist Roy Baumeister spent years studying what happens when people keep drawing on their own discipline without ever replenishing it. Researchers still argue over the exact mechanism behind what he called ego depletion, but one pattern kept showing up across his work. People who repeatedly break promises to themselves don't actually run out of willpower the way they assume. They run out of belief that their own willpower will hold. The tank isn't empty. The trust in the tank is gone, and trying to refill it with more pressure only makes the leak worse. There's also a quieter mechanism working against you, one that has nothing to do with character. Your environment is constantly voting too. The phone charging on your nightstand instead of across the room. The gym bag still unpacked from last week instead of sitting by the door. The browser tab already open to the thing that wastes your evening before you've even decided to waste it. None of that is a willpower failure. It's friction. Working silently in the wrong direction, making the broken promise easier to slide into than the kept one. You don't notice it because it never asks for permission. It just removes the 1 extra second of resistance you needed to choose differently. So here is the part that's going to feel uncomfortable. You don't have a productivity problem. You have a credibility problem, and the person you've lost credibility with is yourself. No app is going to fix that. No planner, no 5 a.m. alarm, no new morning routine copied from someone whose life looks nothing like yours. Because none of those things were ever the actual issue. They're tools being handed to someone who no longer believes tools will work for them. Picture the version of you from 6 months ago, making a promise to today's you, Be consistent. Finish what you start. Stop scrolling at midnight and actually sleep. Now ask yourself honestly, how many of those promises did today's you actually keep? Then flip the question. How many times has today's you made a promise to the version of you 6 months from now? And be honest with the answer. How much do you actually trust that promise to hold deep down the way you'd trust a friend who's let you down one too many times? That distrust is the real obstacle, not laziness, not low energy. A relationship with yourself that's been quietly damaged through small, repeated abandonment. The kind so minor you never called it betrayal, even though that's exactly what it was. Here's the shift, and it's smaller than you expect it to be. You don't rebuild self-respect through a transformation. You rebuild it the same way you'd rebuild trust with another person, through small, kept promises repeated until your nervous system stops bracing for you to fail. Not the massive goal, not the perfectly designed routine pulled from someone else's life. One promise, kept today. Researcher B.J. Fogg built an entire framework around this exact principle. Tiny, almost laughably small actions, repeated consistently, do more to rewire belief than ambitious plans that collapse under their own weight by day 3. So, make the promise embarrassingly small if you have to. 5 minutes at the desk instead of an hour. 1 page of the book instead of a chapter. Shoes on, door open. No further commitment required beyond that single step. The size of the action doesn't matter nearly as much as you've been told. What matters is that future you watches present you follow through, because that's the only evidence your brain actually accepts as real. This is also where the environment stops working against you and starts working for you. Move the friction instead of fighting it. Charge the phone in the kitchen instead of beside the bed. Lay the clothes out the night before instead of negotiating with yourself half asleep. Close the tab before you go to bed instead of leaving it open as a trap for tomorrow's tired version of you. None of these changes require motivation. That's exactly why they work. You're not trying to out-willpower a system designed to catch you. You're just making the kept promise the easiest available option in the room. What would happen if you kept just one promise to yourself today? Not a perfect day, not a new identity by sunset, just one small thing done exactly the way you said you'd do it, with no excuse attached. That single kept promise does something 1,000 motivational videos never could. It tells your nervous system that your word still means something. And that feeling, the quiet, almost embarrassing relief of proving yourself right for once, is the actual beginning of everything you've been chasing under the wrong name. This is also why discipline feels different once that trust starts rebuilding. It stops being a fight against a lazy version of yourself and starts becoming a partnership with someone who simply stopped believing belief was earnable again. Bandura's research is clear on this pattern. Self-efficacy compounds. One kept promise makes the next one easier to trust. Easier to trust makes it easier to keep. That's the loop you've actually been missing, not the disciplined loop you've spent years blaming yourself for failing at. Now picture your future self for a moment, specifically, not in some vague, far-off way. The version of you who, 6 months from now, has quietly stacked up a mountain of kept promises instead of broken ones. That version isn't more motivated than you are right now sitting here. They don't have access to some deeper well of willpower you were denied. They simply stopped voting against themselves every night and started voting for themselves. One unremarkable action at a time. Long before it felt impressive enough to mention to anyone. You're not behind them because they're stronger. You're behind them because they started believing themselves sooner. Tonight, when you make tomorrow's plan, make one you can actually keep. Not the ambitious one. Not the one that sounds good when you say it out loud to someone else. The one you know with total certainty you will follow through on, even tired, even unmotivated, even at the lowest version of yourself standing in front of the mirror, because that's not a productivity tactic. That's the first entry in a long line of evidence that you're someone who keeps their word. You think you're lazy? You're not. You just forgot what it feels like to be someone you can trust, and that's the only thing tomorrow actually needs to prove.